just about educating. Like, you have a simple conversation with them, they'll be like, okay, I know people say all the time, but if you've not got relationships, you can run the best program in the world. Boys are not going to buy into it. It doesn't make a difference, man. But I'd rather somebody be doing something simple but excellently than getting into all this technical stuff and being pretty poor at it and losing that adaptation. You used to get us lined up, and you'd have to put your hands behind your head, and he'd come round and he'd give you a hook either side of your body.
So yes, what's going on, everyone? Welcome back to another Rugby Muscle podcast. I'm your host, as always, TJ. Today, I'm joined by Jack Westley, who, do I say former or current Stade Dijonais head of strength and conditioning?
Former for another week. Current
for another week. Well, let's release
former.
this one after that, and then it'll be former. So, head of strength and conditioning at Stade Dijonais. Head of what is it? Is it Vigor? I'm gonna make it French. Vigor Performance.
Yeah, Vigor Performance. Yeah, mate. Just a little side hustle that I've got going on.
Yeah, looks good. So we're joined by Jack today. Jack, welcome aboard. How you doing?
Yeah, very good. Thank you. Thanks a lot for having me on. Just before we get started, I'd like to apologise in advance for my very strong Yorkshire accent. Try and tone it down a little bit.
I barely notice it, mate. I bet you when you go back to Yorkshire, you'll get rinsed by your mates for it being like very soft now, because it's probably toned down from having to talk with all the French people and stuff. And this is the worst. It's something I found, like, with my living in different places, is now everywhere I go, people say I've got a different accent, so I don't fit in anywhere. And you're going to find that now, unfortunately, unless you go back up north and stay there forever, and then that harsh northern accent will dig straight back in.
That's it. Listen, it doesn't take long. I'll speak to my family back home, and it's straight away. I mean, they're looking at me like this.
That's true.
Some alien language.
That's absolutely true. Yeah, every time, even when I was in the States, when I'm coaching like rugby, and I have my assistant coach who's like a proper Londoner, we might as well be talking a different language. None of the Americans understand us. It's good banter, but everyone here can understand you. It's no problem. So I've been following you for a while, and the reason I wanted to get you on the podcast is because if you've heard the podcast before, we get a lot of people from all different backgrounds, and I thought your background's like pretty unique. I can get some good perspectives from you, and I think the listeners can get a really good idea. So why don't you just sort of, you don't have to give us cliff notes or keep it really brief, but you don't have to also give us your autobiography. But how did you end up in Dijon?
It's actually my second club in France. So I've been in France for 3 years now. I was at Doncaster Knights before, English Championship. I saw an opportunity come up on Twitter or something like that, I remember, to join a team in France. And I knew that we had an intern that was with us the year before who'd gone over to France as a physio. She'd come into intern as an S&C coach at Donny for a few months with us. But she'd gone over there as a physio. She was a physio from the start. And I basically sent her a message. I was like, I've seen you moved to France. How was it? I've just applied for a club. She's like, which club? I told her it was in Rouen. She's like, okay, that's where I am. I'll put in a word for you, blah, blah, blah. Got an interview, and I honestly thought I'd completely shot the interview. I remember ringing my dad after, thinking, man, I'm staying in Rotherham. Don't worry, I'm not shifting. And then a couple of days later, they called me like, yeah, we're really interested. We'd love for you to come over. So, that's how it happened. Passed my first year in France in Rouen, up with Richard Hill up there. And that's it.
And how did you get across to Dijon? Yeah.
Bit of a similar situation, actually. Without knowing anybody here, I just sent an application over. They were recruiting. One of the young lads at Rouen sent me the Facebook post and says, "Yeah, you should send your CV over." So I went home that night, transformed all my CV into French, Google, and then after that, I got a call from the manager the next day. Who were interested in bringing me over to Dijon. Came to have a visit, and I saw the setup over here, and and now we're really interested in coming over. It looked like a really good project.
Cool. And I guess you can get into like how different the two French clubs were, or what sort of turned you off of the. Maybe it wasn't a turn off. Maybe it was just a different opportunity. What made you look for another club when you were in Rouen?
The thing is, when I was at Rouen, is that pretty much all the staff, a lot of the players, they were all English speakers, whether they come from England, Scotland. We had quite a lot of Fijian players, and I was out of my comfort zone in Rouen, obviously in a foreign country, but
With a bit of a
I was
safety
just
net.
speaking English, and it wasn't easy. It were a good introduction to France. And I come to Dijon, and I got offered a position to take over the department, and I knew I'd be completely out of my comfort zone. I'd have to learn French really quick, um, and it just screamed out to me. I think it was just a better decision at the time for me.
Nice.
Uh,
How is your
because
French, by the
even my
way?
first year in one, we had pretty good now. I'm really comfortable. I'll go and speak to anybody in French. It's not bad. It's not
Nice.
bad at all.
But yeah, you had to get thrown in at the deep end to really like appreciate it, like rather than be like
100%.
cradled into it is because you can be out your comfort zone, but still kind of have like safety in there to make it seem and feel a little bit easier for sure. Um,
Yeah,
so
100%.
I guess we can dial it back even further and find out like how you got into S&C in the first place. Because before, I dig in and see, what happens with, in French rugby. I want to find out more about you as a coach first. So then, because then you've got your own perspectives.
Yeah, definitely. So I'd actually been to university in 2014, but before that, I was a personal trainer. I've always loved training people, training myself. When I went to university, we had a work experience module coming up, and I still didn't really know what I wanted to do. I knew that I wanted to be involved somehow in professional sport and training people still, but I wasn't really sure how that would work out for me. I'd never ever played rugby before in my life. Um, I knew the physio at Doncaster Knights, and said to me, "Listen, if you want to come in, see how it works in pro sport, setting up, working as a strength and conditioning coach, I can get you in." And I was like, "Listen, why not? Let's give it a crack." I've never worked in rugby. I've always watched it. I've always been a fan. Never played and never really experienced how it's run. But I loved it. I went in for a work experience for 4 weeks. They asked me to come back for the rest of the season, and it really just started from there. I absolutely loved it, Donny.
Nice. I'm going to ask you a little bit about personal training versus strength and conditioning because I think that's something that like there is. You've got a good experience with that. We get a lot of personal trainers that listen to this, and then we get a lot of also guys that listen to this that they train to be the best rugby players, but they have experience with other personal trainers and stuff, and there seems to be a lot of crossover, but it's not the same, and that's sort of what I'd like to get into. But before that, I just want to sort of go back into your sporting background. So I guess if you're a personal trainer, you're obviously interested in fitness, but if you've never played rugby and with the accent, I would have assumed it would have been league, but it doesn't even sound like that was a thing. What did you do? What
No.
was your sport growing up, or was there a sport growing up, and like what was your impression of rugby when you even as an outsider when you weren't playing?
So my sport has always been boxing. I've been boxing since I was 9 year old. My uncle sort of dragged me down to the boxing club when I was just a young kid, and again from the off, I just loved it. It's something that I've done my whole life. It's been times where it's been on and off, where I've been training, not training, I've competed, or I've completely just left it for a little bit. But I always come back to it. I've been boxing now for years, and I think it's probably the reason why I did get into training. Boxing's really old school, mate. It's really personal trainer sort of style where you can train hard and try and rinse yourself. Do you know what I mean? It's a different kind of world, and I love that world. I love that discipline
Yeah.
and pushing yourself to the absolute limit. But again, I think that's a little reason what I liked a little bit about rugby. It's that toughness. You get in, and it's really boys are smashing each other on a Wednesday afternoon, for example, or something like that. And I was like, this is brilliant. I love the discipline that the boys have on the field, and I think there is ways and it crosses over. They're completely different worlds, boxing and rugby, of course, but there is ways where they cross over quite a lot.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. There's like, it's like that, from the outside, it just looks like this most intense sort of, well, boxing, it's a fight, right? But rugby's similar. But then when you look at it, the deeper you look into it, the more nuanced it is. But at the end of the day, it still is an intense combat, and there's a lot to it, know. And I think boxing even more granular, like you go into like the differences of footwork and stances, and these are things that someone from outside it has no idea, even to the point where like people that wanted to do boxing just to get in shape, they introduced that boxercise stuff, and I used to like that when I was a personal trainer. People would always ask me to do boxercise, and I'd be like, look, like I'm sorry, I've done a few boxing lessons myself, but I'm not at the level to teach you. I'm at the level to know that we shouldn't be doing boxercise. Like if you want to go do boxing and like get those benefits from that, because you will get benefits. Club. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And
I'll tell you as well, mate. Listen, with boxing, there's absolutely nothing worse than somebody who cannot hold the pads. There is nothing worse. It's just.
That's actually true. The first lesson we did was holding the pads. Yeah. Oh. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. If you can't do that, tough job.
And it's like, it gets that Dunning-Kruger. It's one of those things where people that have no idea think that they're experts. And I mean, I get it. It's I've seen rugby fit things prop up every now and again, but it's the same thing, right? If you wanna be the best, if you want to be fit, and if you want to be fit like rugby players, like train like them. Don't do this sort of offshoot thing that isn't really there. And I guess that sort of leads me to quite well actually into your personal training background. Is that what you did like straight out of school? And what sort of clients did you work with there? Before you decided to go to
it was straight out of school, straight out of college actually. I ended up working in the college gym after I finished there. I got an apprenticeship with us to do my level 2 and level 3. But it were a gym where half the clientele was the students there, and the other half were they were quite an older population sort of thing. So it were like two different extremes, and the young kids that were there, they weren't really that into the sports side of it. They were more just into 16, 17, 18-year-old. They just want to get massive when they're going to start going out to the pubs and clubs. You know what I mean? They're not interested in getting better at football or getting better at rugby, for example.
Yeah.
So that was a different experience in terms of I learned how to coach and learned how to work with different people. And I think that's helped me get better as a strength and conditioning coach. It's helped me get more comfortable with being a strength and conditioning coach in a foreign country where you have to demonstrate these exercises on a very basic level. And you have to really break things down to be more specific, as you might do for somebody who's older or somebody who's young and very new to the gym. I think that's definitely give me the confidence and the level of comfort that I needed to be where I am today in France.
Yeah,
if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Did you think that when you were first starting out personal training that you would coach a lot of like athletic types or sport-minded types? Did you think that those are the people that you would end up doing? Because I think that's a lot of personal trainers. Like, I remember when I first became a personal trainer, I was like, cool, I'm going to coach so many athletes. And then you realize, especially every like young student athletes, they're either being taught professionally, like within their clubs or whatever, or they're broke, and they can't afford a personal trainer.
Yeah.
So you end up having to completely change your mindset of who you're going to coach and how receptive those people are going to be to your coaching. I think that's a huge one, right? It's like we think that, especially personal trainers, like you get a lot of personal trainers that do personal training just because they love the gym, and they don't relate to people that don't love the gym. Or yes, even worse, you get people that have just always been shredded. They've always been in shape. Therefore, they go to the gym. Therefore, they're good at it. And they're like, oh, I should make this a career. And it's like, okay, but you have no empathy. And I think that's one of the biggest things that I've been fortunate enough to be like a really fat kid. Like I was a proper chubby kid. And like I get how that feels. Like I know how it feels to not have a clue what you're doing in the gym. Like I know all of those feelings, you know. And it's like if I didn't have that background, if I didn't have that like slow, gradual mindset shift and subsequent like implementation of what I'm trying to do, like I'd be nowhere near as good of a coach. Like if I had all the talent. So trying to deal with those people, I think is quite a really good lesson, and I don't think they're as good a lesson as teaching people in a foreign country in a language that you don't really speak. I had TK on at some point last year who had to do the same thing. He had to coach a speed session in Japan with a full class of Japan or a full squad of Japanese guys, none of which spoke English, and he was just like, okay, then you've got to be really selective over what you choose, you know. So definitely think that like I can relate to that, and I guess in terms of like lessons that sort of taught you. You said it's helped you be the coach that you are now. Is it more about getting buy-in, or is it more about like how you explain what you're doing, or is it a mixture of a few of those things, or something else?
I think it's a mixture. Over here, getting buy-in. To be honest, I've not found it as difficult as what I thought I would.
Oh yeah,
But you just have to explain. You just have to educate. As long as you show what you want them to do and you give them an explanation, they're genuinely fine. I don't know if it's just this group that I've got here, but the boys buy into the program that we're doing pretty well. If they don't, it's just about educating. Like you have a simple conversation with them, they'll be like, okay, you build good relationships. They at least want to try for you, and that's what it's all about as well. S&C, a lot of the time, it's if you've got good relationships. I know people say all the time, but if you've not got relationships, you can run the best program in the world. Boys are not going to buy into it. It doesn't make a difference, man. It does
yeah.
not make a difference.
That's funny. I have
But
that.
these boys here in France, it's
No, go on.
sorry, go on.
I don't want to cut you off.
No, I said the boys here. The one thing that I did find difficult with not necessarily buying, but some of the questions that I was getting asked a lot is um, all based around Olympic weightlifting. The boys here, they love it. It's like you're not Olympic weightlifting, you're not powerful. They don't see any other thing to do. So you get the boys to start lifting heavy and doing some basic compound movements, trying to get the boys strong, and they're a bit like, well, how am I going to do this? How am I going to do that? And that's been the only real, not issue, it's just the only real talking point that we've had around buying. We do Olympic lift with the boys that can, but those boys that can't, we have to maybe break it down or choose a different exercise. It depends on a million.
Yeah.
Depends on
Did
if they
they
can do the exercise, the training age, everything.
did they have a S&C coach before you that was doing a lot of Olympic lifts, or is it just that a couple of them do it quite well and they're like, oh cool, I should try that, or how did that become a thing?
Yeah, you've got young boys coming in that they're seeing things on Instagram or they're seeing things on Twitter or anything like that, and they see people just doing these big Olympic weightlifting movements that all the time. They just want to be like the people that they're following.
Yeah.
The S&C before me, I know he used to spend quite a lot of time working on the technique around stuff like that on the Olympic lifts, outside of the schedule as well, if that makes sense. Um, I'm not 100% sure how we run it, but I know they do quite a bit with him.
That is something that like I always say about Olympic lifts. So I do like Olympic lifts. Like personally, I just think they're cool. Like that's it. But that was it. Like
Yeah.
to the extent that when I first took a break from rugby, I actually competed in a couple weightlifting competitions. Like I was like, I'm gonna go all in on this, and like properly, you know, went down that deep end. And even then, like, firstly, when I got back to rugby, I was not more explosive. If anything, I was like slower. But I was technically better. And so, like, the other thing is now I see, like, it's such a technical movement to get right. And then even if you, like, there's a point where there's a sweet spot, right? And you have to get technically proficient enough to be good at it. But at the end of the day, you're not trying to be a weightlifter. And the trap is when you do stuff like that, that's what you think about. You think about lifting more weight. You don't think about, oh, how is this helping me be a rugby player? And I think that with, like, a lot of movements, right? Even with squats or deadlifts or whatever, powerlifting movements. Like, I try to, when I put those lifts in, like, sometimes, or more often than not, I'll not keep them in for too many blocks because guys will get married to the amount of weight that they're using. So I try and rotate it. Or I'll put in, like, rather than just do a deadlift, it will always be a split stance RDL. It'll be a movement that they don't have an emotional attachment to, so they don't have to worry about really pushing the weight. It is a battle, though, because if people do enjoy it, then, and if they're willing to spend the time in, like it sounds like a lot of those guys were, then you can get quite a lot out of the Olympic lift. But it's not, like you say, it's a tool.
It's just one tool that you can use out of a million things, mate. It depends on the adaptation you're after and what's the general objective you're after. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I guess that's like that all goes back to what you were saying before about, like, with being or the lesson from being a personal trainer is like or it's not personal trainer, sorry, the boxing background. It's like you see all the different things that are going on with an Olympic lift. They don't, like, they're seeing just, oh, this person's powerful. So you've, like, I think you said about education. Yeah. Have you found that the educating your guys, so obviously learning French is a big tool with that, but like educating your guys about the lifts and stuff, or about just strength, like what you're trying to get out of each session in general, is that something that you found to be, like, I don't want to say motivational, but if we're talking about buying, I guess that is another way of saying getting the guys motivated?
Yeah, definitely it helps. And listen, it went easy at first when I got here without speaking the language, but now I can confidently explain what I want to explain or get my point across at least. And the boys, they quite like it. They quite like asking questions and trying to learn a little bit more, and they enjoy that. So I'm gonna help them. And I like it when boys come and ask me questions. I like to have that exchange, and it makes me feel like they actually really want to progress and buy into what we're doing and push on to get better. You know what I mean? Especially young guys that are coming through, start coming and asking you a few questions, or why is this in the program? And what did you do that for? Like, brilliant. I love it. I love that.
You don't just say, listen, because I'm the coach, okay? Fuck off.
Yeah, listen, it's written on the paper. Crack on.
There is, I'm not, like, I guess that there is, or there was, like, an element to that in, like, in rugby, especially, in French rugby, I've seen as well, like, especially from a foreigner coming across, like, that must have been a bit of a challenge, though, because they will, like, French like to do things their way, I mean, people in general,
Yeah.
It's, and I think, did you ever have any athletes that sort of said, no, this is stupid until you explained it? Or, like, I don't know. I guess I see
really,
that being a challenge.
To be honest, the thing for me with that is I completely understand what you're saying about how they want to do their own things and do things their own way, they're old school and this and that. The thing that I saw when I was here, especially in Dijon my first year, is we'd be doing live contact sessions every Wednesday for up to an hour, and it was pretty much just another match in the week. And you're trying to get your point across to the coaches, which is the difficult thing. Players that were giving me the grief with the buy-in and all this thing. It's the coaches to sort of change their thinking around not adding another match in the middle of the week. And there were two examples last season where we didn't do that. And the first game we put 34 points against the team, and we won 34-0, man. Like, we absolutely smashed this team out of the park. Maybe it's not, you never know, but I believe strongly that it probably did help. Does that make sense? You got boys that are fresher at the weekend, ready to go, and getting that to change has been a long process. Where it's a lot better this year, where we started to, I don't want to say minimize our contact. We still do contact, maybe not in the same scenario, not in the same sense where we just be sending boys out on a Wednesday afternoon and play 15 like another match.
I want to go back to that then. So, is that? I guess that's a challenging conversation you must have had with the coach. Is it like? Did you just present it as like from a recovery standpoint, or from an impact standpoint, or and from there, like, what were the solutions to it? Because obviously you've got to replace. He's thinking if they're going to lose out on that contact time, they're going to lose out on in the contact situations in games.
Yeah. So luckily that happened quite early in the season when we beat that team 34-0. It was quite early on, so it was quite easy to have that conversation early. Like, look, maybe it's not all because of this, but this could be a factor as why we've just put this performance against this team. Mm-hmm. We also had a couple of negative impacts from it. Where we got boys that were getting knocked out in sessions on a Wednesday afternoon and being out for X amount of weeks or something like that. So your player availability starts to drop, and it's just directly because of that. Does that make sense? So you present that information to them, and they have to start thinking about how we can change this to get this intensity through the boys, to get this contact through the boys, but safely and in a way that's not going to fatigue them for the weekend. We've took a completely different approach this year where sometimes it is live and sometimes we are doing full contact, but it's limited to a technical drill, or it's limited to 2-3 minute blocks max. And we might get the boys doing a bit of fitness in between. We might get them running. We might get them getting up and down the floor, hitting some bags. And we're trying to really keep that intensity high, but minimize that risk.
Mm-hmm. I think there's a lot of things that you can do with full contact, but putting in specific restraints. Because then, say it's Jacqueline, where where your team struggles is Jacqueline, then you can set up a game where well, first off, it's like working the specific techniques themselves from a low intensity environment. I think is a huge thing that just is not done in rugby. Like how often do you just do bag?
Couldn't agree more.
It's like from your boxing background, I imagine it's like how easy is shadow boxing? Like it's so fucking easy. But no one does that equivalent in rugby, like for those basic skills. Like no one, like you'll do some unopposed, but that's full team, full whack, full intensity still, even though there's no opposition. And that's more of just a tactical thing. Whereas like just honing in that skill of, removing a jackler from the ruck or actually just doing a tackle. Like no one practices those things. And guys that have been listening to this podcast are going to be like knowing that I'm beating that same drum over and over. But it's something that I think, it's such a glaring weakness in rugby that we don't work those basic skills, probably because there are just so many different skills and so many different areas that like rugby, you can almost see rugby as like almost 3 different like mini games. So you've got a contact situation, you've got short ball carrying, and you've got the wider game of like wide passing and running through gaps and stuff. And it is difficult, but it doesn't mean that those things shouldn't be looked at.
No, I agree, and I think especially, do you know what I think for me as well? The way I see it is that it's like because you're professional, you should know how to tackle if you're professional. It doesn't work like that, mate. There's boys that still could. You could always get better. You can always get better. You don't know how to jackal. Oh, well, you should because you're a professional. No, let's work on it. Let's break it down. Let's take a little bit of time with the boys, 10, 15 minutes. You know what I mean? And I think sometimes it's like they're scared of losing time in the session or in the week by doing something as simple as that, where they want to be trying to do all the fancy French flair, complicated. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's also like the real top professionals, you see them do that stuff. Like, and the more I think more social media is coming out, like you get to see stuff. Like I think recently, Aaron Smith's documentary, or like a day in the life or a week in the life of Aaron Smith, has just come out, and it's just him just doing a shit ton of passes, and it's like there's a reason this guy's probably the best scrum half passer in the world, because that's all he does. Like he practices it like week in, week out, and it's there's no coincidence.
Brilliant.
Yeah, definitely. I think it is though. It's like I think the way you think it is similar to me, in that it's like you're coming at it from almost like a first principles background. Like you're taking a step back, like, and that's a real, I think, advantage from you from not having that rugby background. Whereas, like, especially in the French, but in all rugby, really, like you just have coaches that are coaches just because they were players, and they've not really evolved in their playing ability. They're still doing they're just doing the same stuff that they got told to do, and they're just regurgitating it. They're not really looking at it, and then it only takes someone like you to come in to say, "Hold on, why are we doing full contact in the middle of the week?" And he'll just, like, his reason before was because that's what we've always done, you know. And then you look at and you present
Exactly that.
Yeah, I think is there a lot of that in rugby in France, like in terms of like I don't know. I guess you can compare it to your years in England as well. Like, are they still a lot more set in their ways, or not necessarily stuck, because it sounds like you've changed things, but is there still a lot of that old school approach?
Definitely. I think it's, without seeing what goes on in all these different clubs, I think it is pretty much all over France. Some of the boys talk about previous clubs, what they used to do, how they used to train, and it just seems to be the same sort of mentality. And I know we like to use the phrase "less is more" and things like this, but it's difficult to see that here. It just seems to be like, right, we need to do this, so let's do it. Do you know what I mean? It's not like we need to do this, but it's probably not a priority for this week, so can we just push it back a little bit? It's just, right, we need to do this, we're going to do it. We're going to add on, And I just don't think they need to be pushing and doing more and more and more all the time. I think just take a step back, like you say, and stick to your principles, stick to your basics, just be good at those simple things, be really good at those simple things before you start looking in detail.
Yeah, and is that how you sort of approach your strength and conditioning, like the movements that you do? Because you've already said about like how technical the Olympic lifts can be, and how a lot of guys do them wrong, so you're regressing. Are you taking sort of like an essentialist approach to the lifts that you're making the boys do?
Yeah, 100%. I think if primarily the boys are not moving well through a certain movement, for example, you've got to bring it back and you've got to address that quite early on. I think for me, technique is everything. And then you can start loading things up. Then you can start getting strong in those movements. But I'd rather somebody be doing something simple but excellently than getting into all this technical stuff and being pretty poor at it and losing that adaptation. For me, it just makes sense, and that comes from boxing, mate. Like, you see Floyd Mayweather doing all these big long combinations, all these slips and rolls, and throwing 15 shots at a time, for example. And real, mate, like who's ever been knocked out from a combination like that in boxing? Nobody. Keep it simple, mate. Work your jab, get some basic 1-2s in there, and you're good, mate. It's these big simple things that in boxing count, and I think that's definitely transferred over to me as a coach.
Yeah.
100%.
Are your boys at Dijon, are they full time or are they part time?
Now we're full time, yeah. So we're in the third league, which is now completely full time, if I'm correct.
Yeah. Is that
So we're
regionalized, or is that it is regionalized, right? Federal one.
It's national, so it's really new. We're not in Fed 1 anymore. What they did last season, Fed 1 was split up into 4 pools, and each pool had 12 teams. What they did is they took 2 or 3 of the best teams out of each pool based on the last few years' performance. And they created this new national league.
Oh, yeah.
Honestly, it's been so much better this year. The level of competition's gone flying up. The demands of the game have increased massively. There's bigger hits going in every weekend, and every week you feel like you're having a real competitive game. Whereas last year you sort of knew 1 week you're going to go and play against a team that's potentially a university team, inexperienced, young lads, and you knew you're going to go and put 50, 60 points on them. As harsh as that sounds, you sort of knew what were coming. Whereas this new league, anybody can beat anybody on any given week.
Nice. And so with that full professionalism, is it what does your strength and conditioning programming look like? Obviously, we'll take out the influence that you have in the actual like the rugby sessions themselves, because obviously there's a big influence there. But I think a lot of guys would
Yeah.
they always want to know what the pros are doing, or they always want to know what guys are doing. So, like, what can you walk us through like a typical week from a strength and conditioning standpoint?
Yeah, so what we do is, say, for example, if we play on a Saturday, we'd have Sunday off. Monday for us would be we'd have gym and fitness top ups for the boys that didn't play. The other guys would be on recovery. Now, before COVID, we had a second lockdown. We had a partnership with the local pool where we had like team room pool, all that stuff that we'd used to send boys there on the Monday.
Beautiful.
And we'd also do all our video on the Monday from the match before. Tuesday and Wednesday would be our pretty much full days. So we do gym, we do separate for units, change over, and then it'd be a collective rugby session. It depends weekly whether we'd be working on defence, attack, or it changed based on who we were playing. Wednesday would be our big day, not in terms of that we did more, but that would be our high intensity day. So for the units, there might be a little bit more contact. The forwards, for example, would be scrummaging and mauling, and in the collective, then we'd be driving through with maybe a little bit of contact. We've done a lot of pre-fatigue this season, so playing some sequences under fatigue with a fitness drill with me before. We'd have Thursday off, and then Friday would be our captain's run. We'd have a little gym session, a little primer session, and then straight into the boys that didn't play, they'd be doing gym and some more fitness.
Yeah. So
much.
So even there, like, so that's a professional environment, and we've got what, maybe in season 3 gym sessions, like throughout the week, and these guys are full time. Again, it's that less is more. People think that like because you're full time, that means that we've got all this time to train more and more and more. And it's kind of like what we've been saying all along, right? It's like actually no, it's more time to recover than anything else.
Yeah.
So that's
especially this season, where I said to you, where the demands have gone up, we're trying to emphasize a little bit more the recovery for the boys, and as well as a player, and I think even as staff, I think you need that time away from the club to switch off and get your mind away from rugby. It's like working a 60-hour week compared to working a 30-hour week. Working a 30-hour week, you're going to be able to be more concentrated, you're going to be more present, you're going to be more productive, and I think that is massively important in professional sport, where it's a high stress environment. It's based on results, and you're going week to week to week constantly.
Yeah, I think it's. I couldn't agree more. Especially like having been in that realm myself. It's like even though it's something you choose to do for fun, it still becomes work. You know, it's still stressful, and it's still. Even if it's fun, it still puts like physical stress on your body, but it's also a mental stress. Like. You know, and that doesn't like exclude guys that do this for just for fun purposes. You know, people that choose to go play rugby after a job, like that's still, if anything, that's more time that you need to pay attention to your recovery because you're spending more stress. And I've seen guys that like, actually, just a couple of weeks ago, I had a guy write in and he said, how do I switch off because I've got my work, or I can't remember if he was at work or at college, but he's like, I've got my work, and then I go to rugby, and I've got my S&C for rugby, and then I've got my recovery, and I don't get any time to switch off. And I was like, well, first and foremost, like schedule that time to switch off before doing everything else. Like if you've only got 7 hours free a week, like don't spend all those 7 hours training. Like maybe spend 2 of those training, and then you have a 5 you can chill out. Like it's not more is better, and we've obviously made that clear. But also like stress is still stress, man. Like even if it's something that's fun, you're still you're still sort of sending those signals to your body. Like I used to find a good thing for me was to like if I when I was a semi-pro, I would try and get some work done the day of a game. Like, so if I could play if we were playing in the afternoon or the evening, I'd try and get a session in the morning with a client, because it would just take my mind completely off the game. Like the worst thing you can do and people can do is like just carry on studying tape and just make the whole weekend about rugby, and you just don't get any time off. Like, and I get it that you're dedicated, but it takes more dedication at times to like switch off.
For me as well, that's such a massive problem in S&C. I think S&C coaches, there's such a stigma about doing more and being workaholic and just working all the time. And I've been like that. Even last season, I found myself like that. I'd stay at the club and I'd be the last one there, first one there in the morning. And it's not that. That's not the way to do it, right? It's not the way to do it. You got to give yourself time off and give you that extra motivation to go and learn a little bit of something else different. Whenever you want to do it, there's absolutely no. For me, I don't see the rush in thinking, right, I have to work, I have to be working all the time. Not something that I found productive or healthy at all. Whereas this season, don't want to say I took a step back in terms of what I've done in my work, but I've definitely given myself a little bit more free time away from the club, and it's had a massive impact. It's given me motivation to go back training to the club, blah blah blah. But it's getting away, and you feel better when you're at work as well. 10 times better.
Well, if anything, it's like taking time away to sharpen the axe. You know, like it's So like you might. I find this. Like, this is a lesson I learn every like month or so, and I'm like, fuck, I've done it again. Like, doing less, but being like can actually be way more productive than doing more because you're actually way more efficient in those times. It's so true. Like how often have we given ourselves, or like in uni when you'll get 6 months to do an assignment. But you're not doing it in those 6 months. It's actually only ends up only being a few hours of work, so you just leave it to the last minute. So if you'd have done it earlier, you could have you can smash it. It's just it is funny that you get that sort of. I think that comes from S&C, especially comes from a combination of being in the fitness realm where that culture just is always there. Hashtag team no days off is a thing still.
Exactly.
And then it comes from the background of like the fact that it's a job that a lot of people want. So they want to be seen to be showing everyone, look how hard I'm working, look how, whatever. And I think from both of those aspects, like people need to understand, and this is something that I always say in rugby, it's like no one cares like how hard you're working. All they care about is the result. Like the referee doesn't ask how often you've been to the gym before a scrum. He just sits you both down and he makes you fucking scrum, and whoever wins that scrum wins that scrum. Or there's no like we could talk about body weights. You could talk about anything. Like it's not like, especially when it comes to conditioning as well, where it's done like there's so much aerobic work and there's so much lower intensity work that you can do, or really short, high intensity work that you can do to get fitter. All these people that are doing a Bronco every day or 20 Broncos every day, and they're working so hard. Like, first off, you're not going to finish doing that. Like, whatever program that is, you'll drop out within a week. You can't stay consistent on that. And secondly, like, you can get such a better result by working like less hard and less often.
Yeah, exactly. It's so true as well, man. It's so true. We used to do the Bronco, but again, you learn a little bit more. You go and you see that actually you are doing something that's probably not going to relate that much to what you're doing in the match. At the end of the day, that's what it's all about. If what you're doing doesn't produce the result that it needs to every weekend, you're lost.
Yeah,
you're completely lost.
I slag off the Bronco every single week on this podcast, but it's not, but if it's a test, it's still just a test, right? And if people want to use it, like it's a measurement of some sort that people can use, and that's the only counter argument I'll ever sort of accept, and I get it. But then even then, it's not a. People do it to train. Like they'll say, I'm going out, I'm going to go run a few Broncos to train. I'm like. I remember a few years ago, a guy said, I'm just going to do a beep test every week to sort of, I'm like, but why? Like, that's a test. It doesn't make any sense. And that's the thing.
It'll make you better at the beep test. It's not going to make you a better rugby player.
Yeah. It's insane. All right. So before we get into our last few questions, I do want to know, really what you think your biggest takeaways in terms of like your background as a boxer, I guess, like how that's influenced your approach to strength and conditioning, and how much. I also wouldn't mind getting your views on like strength and conditioning for boxing and how that's, because I remember before I was really in the strength and conditioning realm, I read one of Ricky Hatton's books, and there was, and now when I look back on it, I'm like, Jesus Christ, he used to like not drink water because that was thought to be putting on weight. So before we get into those, I want to know, like, in terms of the background of boxing, what that sort of has instilled in you as a strength and conditioning coach.
I think it's in a weird way, like you just said, Ricky Hatton and all his styles that he used to do to lose his weight and things like that. I think that's what's made me push on to do strength and conditioning, because boxing's a little bit like what we say about French rugby, where it's really old school, mate, and it's not moved for so long. But it's just that you go in and like, right, we're going to do a circuit, and you're like, okay, what are we going to work in certain time zones? Are we going to, I don't know, are we going to work short and sharp? Are we going to do something a little bit long, less intense? And it's just like, no, we're just going to do, the guys are at the front of the room just shouting out a different exercise every 30, 40 seconds whenever they feel like it. And you'll just keep going for 20 minutes. And that's just unfortunately how it used to be. You go into any boxing club in England, and there's going to be an old guy that's been there for 40 years at least. And it's him running the session, mate. He doesn't know anything else. And that's fine. That used to work now, but the sport's changing. As with every sport, it's becoming more demanding. The guys are getting bigger, stronger, faster, and you have to take a different approach. I'm actually really lucky to do my master's degree at Sheffield Hallam, across Danny Wilson and Alan Ruddock, who run the boxing science program. I spent a couple of weeks with those guys, and I follow them on Instagram, Twitter, everything. And they're really at the top of the game when it comes to strength and conditioning in boxing. The way that they've completely changed the perspective and changed how it's run is absolutely brilliant. Doing things like lifting heavy weights and getting guys sprinting for just short periods, but really, really intense. It's just not really existed like that in boxing. It's just high repetition. And these guys are really changing the game and what they're doing in their approach. And I think it's brilliant for the sport. They're working with people who are challenging for European titles, domestic titles. Even they've been working with Kell Brook and Billy Joe Saunders before for preparing them for world title fights. These guys are really, really brilliant.
Nice.
Really good.
Yeah, it's one of those things that you have to, again, I guess it can go back to that sort of less is more approach with with you know, it's probably why that's honed in, is because there is so much like noise and pointless things that are thrown in, like with old school boxing, that like you're like, why am I doing this? And that's and that's why you probably gives an insight into why you like to educate the athletes as well, is because how many times in boxing, like old school coach, and you'd say, why are we doing this? Because I'm fucking saying so, all right? Now go and do it. Yeah, but why are you saying so? Because that's what everyone's always done, all right? Do it this way.
That's what
everyone else has always done it. Yeah, it's. Do you think there's like an influence from like, because I know obviously a boxing now is like you'll get a lot of crossover with MMA, and obviously MMA being such a new sport is almost pioneering this other direction of like it's quite. There's some old school stuff in there for sure, but there is a lot of like real sports science heavy stuff that influence it, and even there's a lot of pseudoscience with it, but there's a lot of real good sports science in it as well. Do you think that's influenced like how boxing sort of changed its approach, because people have seen that and gone, oh, what are we doing?
I think so, definitely. Like you've got this big UFC Performance Institute in Las Vegas. You've got quite a lot of S&Cs now that are pushing towards working with UFC and MMA fighters, and I think it's definitely come from that a little bit, which is good, because before that, what your only references to S&C in the boxing culture is Rocky Balboa films. Like you see him going and chopping wood out.
Drago used.
And it's just not the same.
What have I done there? Sorry, I was going to say, I clicked something as I was about to say that the problem is that Drago lost, and he was the one that was using science. So that just shows you, you know, Drago was the one that was usually
Exactly.
Rocky was completely clean. He was just fucking smashing wood with the axe, and he won. Drago was using all this science and cheating with steroids and whatever, and he lost. So, yeah, you're right.
Exactly. He didn't paint it in a good picture. Definitely.
Yeah, but it is something that is. I think it's changing all the sport. Like you've seen it change slowly but surely with rugby because of the professionalism, and I think with the sort of how much sports science is also still kind of new as well. Obviously, like with rugby, it's like here's a sport where it's just let's have 15 guys try and smash through another 15 guys and carry a ball along the way. Like that's kind of obvious. Like there's some sports science to be involved into making that stronger. But with boxing, because you get a lot of the technique stuff like that is obviously really, really important, it almost tries to tell people, and it's the same with, I do a lot of jiu-jitsu, and you get a lot of that in the community. It's like, yeah, strength doesn't really matter. It's like, well, yeah, really, motherfucker, then why do we have weight classes? Like, of course
exactly, so true, man.
Like,
so true.
Yeah, so I think that there's, like, boxing's getting there, it's just a little ways behind. What's some of the freakiest old school things that people used to have you do, or that you've seen firsthand through boxing?
So we had when I was younger, I had a coach, and he used to be a doorman, he used to be a bouncer, and at the end of the session, he used to get us lined up, and you'd have to put your hands behind your head, and he'd come round and he'd give you a hook either side of your body. After that, he'd be on the floor plank position. He'd come round and he'd give you a big old boot into the old stomach, and it's contact, didn't it? Prepare your body, and it was mental, man. But honestly, you look back now and you have to laugh, mate. It was brilliant.
Yeah,
so funny. Not at the time. But,
yeah, you couldn't laugh at the time because actually, you could laughing would sort of tense you up enough that it would be all right. But no.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think
definitely that.
I don't know why that sort of harkened me back to that Rocky speech, which is still like legendary. Actually, the best speech he gave is in the one when he didn't even. He did fight in the Rocky Balboa one where he said about it's not how much you like.
When he's older.
Yeah, he says it's not how much you can. It's not about how hard you can get. It's not how hard you can hit. It's how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward. And that like is like the most inspirational speech in Rocky. And I'm like, that makes sense now, because like when you actually watch, if you're obviously you'll watch the fights in Rocky, and you'll cringe every single time because they just keep getting hit. Like, why don't you just put your fucking gloves on? How about you don't get hit? Like that's
defense
always my.
Does not exist in Rocky, man. There's no such thing as defense. But defend with your head, and that's it.
It's like my biggest gripe is like with that speech is like I get the inspiration, but like how about you just don't get hit? Like how about that? Like
hit and don't get hit. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, exactly. And there's a lot of like ways to sort of cross that over to rugby and just to life in general. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know why that brought that into my head, but it is. I think because of what we've been talking about, also makes sense as well. Cool.
Definitely.
So, have you got any new plans then for when you finish your time? Are you finishing up in France? Are you heading back to England after this? Is that your plan?
Yeah, so I'm heading back to England. I'm just gonna go. I've been here for 3 years. I'm gonna go back home, spend a little bit of time with my family. I don't know what the future holds as of now. I've not got anything concrete in place. I'm gonna push on with my vigor performance a little bit more. Honestly, I'm just looking forward to getting home, having a little bit of a pause, and just enjoying time with my friends, family. My missus is back home as well, so she'll be glad that I'm coming back to annoy her.
There you go. There's something to be said about like pushing yourself out your comfort zone, but there's also something to be said about every now and again, like it can be exhausting, like getting back to that comfort zone for a bit, taking a break, or doing, figuring out what you're gonna do, like putting stuff on the back burner for a bit. Like there's no problem with that,
No, definitely, and it is different working in a foreign country. I mean, I've got friends here at the club with the boys, but apart from that, it's difficult to go out and make friends with people in France, if that makes sense, when you're not really. I mean, I speak the language great, but I'm not really that sociable anyway, going out and trying looking for friends. So the only thing you know is the club and your apartment or your home, for example. Um, so I think it's going to be good to go home and get back into that social aspect of my life as well, and have a little bit of fun.
For sure, for sure. Well, we'll keep following you along. I guess this leads me to my last three questions, which I always ask. Start a little bit of a bigger question, and it goes into easy ones. But the first one is, what does strength and conditioning? We can talk about rugby strength and conditioning, maybe even French rugby strength and conditioning.
Mm-hmm.
What does that look like in 20 years' time? And will you still be involved?
Good question.
I
I
know.
think in 20 years' time, I think it's still going to be as competitive as ever, and I think there's still going to be people wanting to work at the highest level and wanting to push on and drive the sport. I'm hoping that it takes a little bit more of a bigger influence, um, certainly with technical coaches.
Yeah.
Um, I think S&C is pretty well developed now in rugby, especially in rugby league, and I think it just needs taken to that next level where there is a little bit more involvement with the technical coaches on how the trainings are being run and things like that. It's just becoming more and more known, and I think that's the only way that it's going to go is to keep continuing in that direction. Um, I'd like to say that I'm still going to be in it in 20 years' time. I really enjoy being an S&C coach, and I've enjoyed what I've done coming over here to France, and I'd love to be able to continue with it in 20 years' time. I'd love it.
Yeah, cool, man. I sort of agree. Like, I do think that we're getting close. Like, because it was only 10 or so years ago where the strength and conditioning coach was just one guy there, that would maybe take people. And his only time he'd be in charge is warm ups and the gym,
Mm-hmm.
and the gym session was completely removed from the training session. The coach would do something completely different. Like, now it's a lot. There is a
Yeah,
lot more integration, as you said. Like, the coach, like, and is it James the Thinker Smith has always proposed that, like, sort of there should be like a head of performance sort of role that sort of feeds into
yeah,
both looks at both the strength and conditioning side and then the actual, like, playing tactical coaching side of things, because they're not done in a vacuum, and there's the only way players are ever going to progress is development that integrates all of those things. It is a really
the
difficult thing to
two.
get, for
I
sure.
agree.
Yeah.
Mm.
And I think I
And
probably
there's no one way to do it, which is very difficult. I think there's
yeah.
no right. This is how it has to be done. It changes in every club, in every sport. And that's what makes it exciting is that it's such a complex thing that
Has many
you
answers
have
and
to
many
look at it
ways
from
to
so many
solve
different
those answers.
angles.
Yeah, for sure.
Exactly, and I think that's what makes it so good and makes it as good as what it is.
Yeah, that's why I love it, for sure. Um,
Mm.
yeah, you look at even in the Premiership, like, you've got the top teams there. They all have a completely different approach. Like, you look at Pat Lam, you look at Bristol, and then you look at what the Exeter Chiefs are doing, or you look at what Eddie
Mm.
Jones does. Like, they're not the same thing at all, and they're all kind of
No,
successful. You could debate about how successful England have been, but or even then you look at the French, and they've got a different model, and
yeah,
their
exactly.
success there. So yeah, for sure. All right, what's one song everyone needs in their gym playlist?
Mine for me, I'm gonna give you a full playlist instead
Oh, I
of a
like it.
song, and
I'm gonna put it in the notes.
there's actual multiple ones. But two American guys, and they go by the name of Two Friends, and they have a series of playlists called Big Booty Mix, and it's just an hour long mashup of pure happiness. It's
Oh yeah.
great. It's great.
Is it on Spotify or is it on YouTube?
It's on YouTube definitely. It's weird. Sometimes I look on Spotify and it's there, and then sometimes I look and it's gone. So I don't know what the crack is with that, but it's always on YouTube.
Oh,
They
I'll
just
put it.
released a new one, but I'm a big fan.
Mate, I'm gonna get listening to that big booty mix straight away. And finally, so you said you're
Uh,
gonna look to grow vigor performance and keep doubling down on that. How can listeners follow that, follow you, get in touch, and get more information from you?
Yeah, so currently I'm only on Instagram. With the handle is literally just Vigor Performance. I'm just trying to make it grow at the minute and seeing where I can take it. I'm working with athletes in France. I'm working with athletes back home in England already, and it's not just limited to rugby either. I've been working with a semi-professional tennis player over here in France.
Oh, nice.
Since August last year, and that's just been it's been great to see something other than rugby as well.
Yeah.
But I'm pretty open to working with all kinds of not just rugby.
Tennis is a cool one to do as well.
Yeah, it's really good. Really good.
And I guess there again, going back to your boxing background, there's got to be sort of similarities there with the footwork and the striking coming through. Yeah, cool, man.
Massively, huge emphasis on that, on the rotation as well. A lot of things, similar little weaknesses that boxers have as well. It shows in the same sense in a tennis player. There's a lot of similarities that I found.
I can see that, yeah, for sure. All right, so Vigor Performance. We'll just follow you on Instagram, and then you've got Jack. Is it Jack _ Westley?
No, it's just it's Jack Weather.
Oh, yeah, that's right. I'll put that in the show notes below as well. So give him a follow on Instagram. Real good content, good ideas, and obviously that's why you came on the pod, man. So thank you for joining us, Jack. It was awesome to have you on.
Thank you
It was a really
so
good
much
chat.
for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, absolutely,
man.
mate.
Really enjoyed that. Cheers.
Cheers.
I hope my accent wasn't too strong, but yeah, thanks a lot.
It's all good, mate.